Good. All right. Wow, this is exciting. It's good to see real people, virtual people too. So hello, everyone. I'm Mauricio Cantor. And as she said, I just recently joined you guys here at the OSU. And I can't really describe how exciting it is to be out of a cave after 2 years to speak in public with real people. This is great. And I'm super excited to be here and part of your community and OSU, Hatfield, Marine Studies Initiative, Department of Fisheries, Wildlife and Conservation Science, and Marine Mammal Institute. It's a whole lot of great people to be surrounded with, a lot of new acronyms to memorize too. And can you hear me okay with the mask? I'm not gonna take it because it matches my shirt and this is great, but it also is good to remind ourselves that it's still going on. It's not over yet. So I'm a biologist by training and a behavior ecologist by passion because I'm really puzzled by why things do what they do, when and where they do, and why they keep doing those things. To put it another way, I do not understand behavior, and that's why I study. And behavior is really important. Someone already said this famous quote, that behavior is important because it's everything you do from the moment you're born until the moment you die. But not only that, everything you do has an impact, has an effect on something else. Therefore, you interact with the environment, you interact with your peers, other species. And I'm really interested in trying to measure those interactions, to the consequences of these interactions to the individuals, populations, and communities and ecosystems. I know it's a whole lot of work, still Thursday, so we have time, And yeah, today, I want to give you an example of this. And it's an example that matters a lot for me because I grew up surrounded, close by it. But I want to make the case that it matters for you too, because it illustrates how the behavior we choose, we humans choose, can make a positive impact in our diverse communities. So let's start with some good news. Oops. Good news is apparently, there we go. Start with some good news. So I don't know if you noticed, but nature is still diverse. So let's enjoy that. And for as long as there has been scientists and natural histories, buffs around, there has been fascination for diversity. At any scale that you look at, could be ecosystems, habitats, populations, individuals. Life forms are diverse and are dynamic. And at the heart of this dynamic natural system, there are interactions. So again, those behaviors, you do something, you have something, some reaction in return. So we know by now that the evolution of biodiversity is not only the outcome of individuals, of species emerging alone and independently, but rather from the way organisms have been interacting with the environment and with organisms of the same and different species. So it's important to understand this diversity of interactions because it connects most, if not all, life forms. And I might sound cheesy here, but if everything's connected, then a small change over here can scale up and have a big change to the upper biological scales. Okay. So one classical way that people have been approaching these challenges of understanding the diversity of interactions is by mapping ecological communities as networks. So there we have nodes representing species connected by links that can represent a handful of ways that the species can interact with each other. So looking at this big picture is really effective. And in fact, many of the fundamental insights that we have on the structure, dynamics, and resilience of ecological communities come from the appreciation of the so-called Darwin's complex web of relationships. However, this approach requires bold assumptions. For one, we have to assume that all individuals that we pack within those nodes, they're equivalent or they contribute equally to those interactions. And second, we have to assume that those interactions are stereotypes, they're fixed in space and time. And we know that these ecological networks, they hide another level, another dimension of diversity, behavior diversity. And one particular feature that I'm interested is in behavioral specialization. So when individuals specialize in a subset of the behaviors that are expressed by the population. So diversity of interactions has been tackled at different scales. Behavior ecologists look mostly at individuals, population ecologists at populations, of course, and community ecologists at species. Each of these scales come with a range of their own questions, their own dimensions of diversity, their own challenges on how to measure it. And most of the cross-disciplinary research that we have has been taking place at adjacent scales. And my overarching goal is to try and expand those links so we can start seeing what are the contributions of the individuals to the structure and resilience of the community. And then on the way back, how this emergent pattern and processes feed back on the individual's lives. So one way we could do this is taking a given community and then cropping a manageable part of it to start measuring costs and benefits of individuals interacting. But there's no guarantee that what we discover here on this given community, if we put in a different place or under different ecological conditions, there's no guarantee that the nature of those links, those interactions will be the same. It could be completely different. So things are dynamic. So we can go a step further and work with what I like to call a sandbox system. So a much simplified community when we can keep track of the individual's behavior and the interactions among them. So to illustrate this approach, as I said, I brought here today an example where we can unpack the meaningful interactions among all actors of a given system to understand how they take place among individuals and how they scale up to shape the community dynamics. So my first goal here is first to review how different behavior tactics make up interaction among species. And then second, to zoom out and infer the consequences of these interactions to the resilience of the system that they form together. So the story takes place in southern Brazil, where wild bottlenose dolphins approach the herd fish and approach the coast, where a line of artisanal fishermen wait for the right moment to cast their nets. And so fishers get some fish out of it, and dolphins, after they echolocate like crazy and go after their shit. So this is an intriguing system because the ecological interactions are taking place between two apex predators, and they seem to be stable for the last 120 years. And they seem to be socially transmitted across generations. Let's get this out of the way. It's also one of the few remaining examples of cultural foraging between humans and wildlife that was more widespread than they are nowadays. So while the key participants of the system are only three, the bigger picture is still rich. So we need to understand, for example, the distribution of prey in space and time. So asking questions like how many fish are there and how's the abundance of fish affected by environmental conditions. And for the fishers, we need to know how they synchronize their behavior with the dolphins and how that synchrony affects their fishing success. Finally, for the dolphins, we need to understand what they gain from interacting with humans and how the existence of these interactions impact their population dynamics. So to tap into these questions, my team of collaborators in Brazil and we developed this kind of multi-platform system to track the interactions among the three species at the same time above and underwater. So we use, for example, sonar cameras to quantify fish. We track dolphins with drones and fishers with GPS bands to quantify their spatial behavior and coordination. We photograph dolphins and interview fishers to identify who is who and who they interact with. And we record dolphin echolocation and observe fishers at the beach to quantify the rewards for interacting. So our first step here is understanding how environmental conditions influence the prey, that in turn shapes the propensity for the predators to interact. So the abundance of mullet, which are migratory, they're likely to be influenced by the ecological, regional, and local conditions. So in the winter, mullet migrate from Argentina and South Brazil, and when conditions are suitable, they enter estuaries and lagoons, like our study place in Laguna, to feed and grow. So the first step is to estimate how many fish are available for dolphins and fishers to catch. And doing this is harder than it might seem. First of all, because the water can be super murky, so you simply cannot see the fish. And to solve this problem, we deployed this sonar imaging system. So it works a little bit like ultrasound system for pregnant people and other animals, I guess. So it projects acoustic energy and then interpret the returning sounds and produce digital images. And then by coupling the sonar with the drone and hydrophone, then we start to get a more complete picture of what's going on in that super fine scale where the interaction matters. And then filtering, processing all of these videos, we can then relate the abundance of fish represented there by the intensity of the pixel on those sonograms to the ecological conditions such as wind, direction, speed, water temperature, and tide conditions, and so on. All of those environmental conditions that we know affect the migration of mullet. So when we feed models to this type of data, we can start identifying better and worse conditions for fish to be around at the interaction site. So for example, mullet fish tend to be 35% more likely to be detected during the low flood tide and warmer days. So from the predictions of this type of modeling, then we can, which is represented in that thin line over there, we can start looking how it affects the presence and the success of both predators. So in the absence of dolphins, fishers tend to follow the same environmental cues, but the few fishers that try their luck by themselves when there's no dolphins around, which is represented in the y-axis over there, they tend to go fish more often in conditions of higher mullet suitability and in the x-axis over there. But fishers follow the dolphin presence much more closely than they do the environmental cues, because they know without the dolphins, the chances of catching any fish, they're pretty low. So you can see on the y-axis, the number of fish caught by fishers in the absence of dolphins. And it's pretty much zero independently of the fish suitability, except for that lucky guy who got 10 fish once. But everybody knows it's a losing battle. But lucky for them, dolphins also tend to show up in those good conditions. So the number of dolphins, although not as strong as the fishers, here represented in the y-axis, they tend to be slightly higher towards conditions of high fish suitability in the x-axis. And then by putting GPS on the fishers, we start understanding their movements in and out of the water. So it's pretty clear that they respond quite strongly to the presence of dolphins. So in that map, you have the distribution of fishers in the sampling area at the beach and in the water. And on the top, you have the positions where they wait for the dolphins to approach. And when dolphins show up, there's an example of a track. It stimulates this rapid movement from the beach to the water, to the suitable positions for fishing. So all of those cues, oops, and I forgot one thing. Oh yeah, so and in response, they tend to, when we have more dolphins in the area, we also have more fishers. So there's a attraction there. So this evidence of attractions from the three species indicates that this is not just a random aggregation of two predators and one prey, but is likely a case of a mixed species social predation. But the key detail here is that only the presence of dolphins do not guarantee that fishers will catch any fish. It won't impact their success. So to investigate the effects of dolphins and fishers on each other's foraging success, then we measure the benefits in 4 different cases. The first one is in the behavior cue. That's the typical interaction where the actions of both predators are in synchrony. So it typically works like a dolphin approach, make a behavior cue that the fishers interpret as the right time and moment to cast their nets. And then the second type is when there's a lack of synchrony. So the dolphins approach, make the cue, but fishers cast either at the wrong place or wrong time. And then there's cases of mismatch between actions when dolphins do not make a cue, but fishers cast their net, or the other way around. It's a bit more rare, but dolphins don't make a cue and fishers cast their net. All right, so just to make it clear what a cue is. So a cue is a stereotypical behavior by the dolphins that fishers interpret as the right time to react. So the most common is this distinct dive. It's kind of when they arch their back in front, very close to the fishers, what the local fishers call, which could be translated into a jump. Right, so then from a more privileged point of view of the drone, we can start measuring other more nuanced ways that the dolphins approach. So for example, the distance, angles, and the time they spend underwater. And it's pretty clear that from this type of data that when dolphins give a cue, they tend to approach the coast more closely in acute angles and dive for longer after. So we can start really seeing the difference in the behavior in 2 conditions. And now the next step is understanding how does that contribute to the fishing success of the fishers. But the bigger question still remains, what is in there for humans and fishers that interact? So from this kind of fine scale data, we can now start looking what dolphins are doing to the fishers. And I'll just give it right away. So the crucial part is dolphins are really bringing fish within an area that is reachable by this fishers. So picture this, a mullet school passing through the canal. It's out of reach for these fishers who stay in the edge of the canal. So with dolphins actively herding these mullet schools toward the coast, they create that interaction area, they turn that interaction area in a high quality resource patch for them. So what you see in that graph is on the y-axis, you have the mullet detection. So the amount of mullet we detect on the sonar, which is deployed from the fisher's line. In x-axis, you have time relative to the interaction moment, marked by that dashed line. The insets are the predictions from modeling this data. So when the interaction is synchronous here in red, you can see that after the moment of the dolphin cue, the number of detections increase pretty clearly, and we don't get the same type of pattern in all the other 3 types of asynchronous interaction. So it's pretty much before and after that, the moment of their interaction is pretty much the same. So pretty random. Okay, and then by sitting at the beach, then it's easy to quantify how much the fishers get out of this synchronous and asynchronous interactions. So we can count, measure, and weight their catch. And there are 2 clear messages. First is net casting is hard, so they don't catch that much. But when dolphins are around, they definitely catch much more. So what you're seeing here is relative to the fish, to the mullet suitability in the x-axis, you have the number of mullet caught by these fishers in synchronous interactions here in red and everything else on the other side. So you can see that when the interactions are synchronous, dolphins make a cue, fishers react to it in the right time. They tend to catch much more fish than otherwise, and almost independently of how much fish is in the air. As opposed to when the interactions are asynchronous, no matter how much fish there's there, they pretty much catch nothing. So the bottom line is the dolphin presence increased the probability of fishers catching fish by about 10 times. So we can really see that that foraging synchrony is what driving the foraging success of fishers, of humans. And now it leads us to the obvious question: what is in there for the dolphins? Good. The hypothesis is simple. They also catch more fish. Great. But measuring the dolphins' foraging success is much, much harder. One of the reasons is the water is pretty murky. When we cannot, usually we don't see the fish underwater. So it's rare for us to see what they get. And that's where the real work starts. So what we do is we can use the same trick that we used for counting how many fish were there using the sonar cameras, but this time using the dolphin sonar. So we will look into their own sonar to see how much they're investing into active foraging during those 4 situations. You all know here, dolphins echolocate to go about their environment and go after the prey. So they produce these small pulses of sound, these clicks, and they interpret the echo of these clicks once they bounce into something. And these clicks help dolphins to navigate and to forage. And in another study, this one where they put a camera and a hydrophone on the dolphin's head, you can see that they're clicking around and kind of scanning the environment. And as they home on a prey, they will increase the rate of emission of these clicks and therefore reducing the interclick interval, the time between those clicks. So we can start using, from this temporal series of clicks, we can identify these different phases in their foraging. So it's different echolocation processes. So that's what we did. And our hypothesis will be, okay, so if the dolphins are really getting something out of this interaction, then they should engage in more active foraging, that terminal bus phase where they produce lots of clicks per second, in response to the fishers casting nets. So we will hypothesize that they will use more of those navigation regular clicks before and after the interaction, but when they are there facing the fishers and interacting with them, they would engage more often into those terminal bus clicks. So to test this, we continuously record the dolphins, accounting for how many dolphins are in the area, and before and after the interactions. Then we develop some tools to detect and count and measure those interclick intervals. And then to the temporal series of clicks, we fit some unsupervised learning algorithms to tell us, okay, this is this process, this is the other process. So here you can see 2 clusters, the red and green there, with the pretty tiny interclick intervals of about 2 to 4 milliseconds. So those are the clicks we consider to be the terminal bus clicks, the active foraging. And then comparing this to control studies done in captivity, where they have a single dolphin with a hydrophone on the head. And so comparing to those thresholds of how long those interclick intervals are, our green and red clicks are pretty much there. So we're now using this as a proxy of, okay, dolphins are really going for it. And then everything else, all the regular navigation clicks and the interclick intervals, we discarded those things. So the bottom line here is dolphins invest in much more of those terminal clicks during synchronous interaction. What you're seeing there is the y-axis, you have the count of these active foraging clicks, these terminal bus clicks, Again, in the x-axis, you have the time relative to the interaction marked by the dashed line. Mean sets show the models, the predictions from the model. So we can see that after during synchronous interactions, dolphin make a cue, fisher react, casting nets, they clearly engage in the production of a lot of those terminal bus clicks. In the video I showed you before, that loud noise, that was an example of it. And we don't get the same pattern when the interaction is asynchronous. Note that there's a tiny gap from the moment of the cue until they start clicking more often. And it turns out that time is about the same time that it takes for the net to sink and close over the fish. About 17 seconds. Good, so, all right, I know what you're thinking. They're clicking, they're not eating. I'm the first one to admit that this is a proxy for foraging effort, but not specifically for the amount of prey they're getting from this. However, if they're consistently engaging in this reaction to what the fishers are doing, to me is a pretty clear evidence that there's something going on there. If they're, over and over again, you get the same pattern there, at least this terminal bus clicks will be the equivalent of a dolphin casting a net. So they're really trying hard at that specific moment. And from the underwater footage, I'll walk you through this video in a second. From the underwater footage, what surprised us was to see that in some cases, the dolphins are not only interacting in the area, but they are interacting with the net. So as you know, a tight, coordinate fish school is a textbook example of a good strategy against predators. So it has been hypothesized before that what the fishers are doing is with their nets, they're disrupting this school, either by removing most of the fish or breaking the school apart, and thereby facilitating the fish capture by the dolphins. But what we hadn't expected to see is dolphins really going under the net and taking fish out of this. And this matches actually with interviews done in the past. When you ask experienced fishers, they report that they can feel in the net that the dolphins will take 1 or 2 fish out of their net. So just quickly, I know the video is not as clear. This is similar to one ultrasound in pregnant people where the mother is usually super excited about and you can really understand what's going on. So it's very similar to that. But so there's 3 stages there. Remember, this is a bird eye view. So you can see the net from the top. So that circle is the net. And on top, there's a dolphin approaching it. Then as the net closes, in this case, just 2 fish there inside of it. And right after that moment of shuffling around is the dolphin interacting or perhaps trying to catch something inside the net. And yeah, and then sometimes I don't know if you can see there, I'm pretty blind from here, but sometimes you can see on the fish that the fishers catch, their bites on it. So dolphins are really taking advantage of the net as well. Okay, so let me just sum up this first part, which is longer. The second will be quicker. The availability of fish is influenced by the environmental conditions and by dolphins pushing then the fish into that area where the interaction happens. So dolphins creating a high quality patch of resource that is reachable by the fishers. And the fishers' dolphins' actions and reactions and foraging success are highly dependent on each other. Okay, so this first close look, when we zoom in into one specific interaction in this system, it reveals 2 key features. The first one is the synchrony is crucial for this interaction to happen, for the benefits of both predators. And second, it also reveals that there's a lot of variation in this across all axes of this interaction. So there's variation in the quality of the individual players, dolphins, fishers, And there's variation in the quantity of the resource, mullet, that underpins their interaction. So as part of the research, our students and other colleagues are doing interviews with the fishers in quantifying their behavior. So it's clear from these interviews that they're more experienced and less experienced fishers. And from the drone data, we can start measuring the distance, the time, and the position of each individual fisher. So there's clear variation among them. On the dolphin side, we also find quite a lot of variation. So there's variation in the time they arrive at the interaction site, how often they go interact with fishers, and how much fish they bring to the fishers. And the fishers themselves long recognize this and have dubbed them as the good, the bad, and the lazy dolphins. And the bad ones don't usually have a name, but the good dolphins, for being there so often, they got cool names like Caroba and something else. Cool. The not so good news is there's variation in the third axis too, which is the resource. And we can start seeing from the mullet captured by the small scale fisheries in the area, that the regional availability of fish has been declining over the recent years, particularly during the duration of our study. Yeah, so there is variation in dolphins' behavior, in fishers' behavior, and in resource. So why this interaction is important? It's important because it's where the resilience of the interaction between these three relies on. So because behavior variation between dolphins and fishers can translate into a lack of synchrony between their actions and reactions, therefore lowering the foraging success of both predators. And this obviously gets worse if there's fewer fish available. So like in any cooperation, the persistence of an interaction like this will depend on the payoffs that the individuals receive. And declining payoffs can then lead to predators to abandon this interaction, this foraging tactic. Okay, so as the resource has been declining, the populations of dolphins and fishers has been changing too. So as part of our research, we've been doing interviews with fishers in the past 16 years, and it's clear that the overall experience of fishers has been declining, and the interest of younger fisher in partaking in this tradition is also not super high as it used to be. And then from 12 years of boat-based sampling of the entire area, tracking every individual in this population of dolphins, it's the good news is the population is quite stable. There's no obvious trend there. So it's about 55 to 60 individuals. However, the composition of the population changed quickly. There's a high 30% turnover of individuals in the past decade. So again, not so good news is most of the individuals that have been replaced are those good dolphins. And in fact, the overall frequency of interaction between dolphins and fishers has been declining recently, and suggesting that the good dolphins they're still there, they're declining the amount of time they spend foraging with fishers, and most of the dead dolphins are the good dolphins too. And well, fishers recognize that. For example, over there you have Mandalão, which was a male dolphin that are super famous in the area that died recently. And fishers used to joke that he was so good that looks like he was trying to hit them with fish because they were so good at bringing fish close to the shore. Now, if the same type of population turnover and declining experiences taking place on the fisher side, as new, younger fishers are not partaking in the tradition or the experienced old ones are being replaced by unskilled individuals, then the question that we are left with is how long would this interaction persist? Or even better, can can we anticipate any tipping point on the payoffs of the interaction to prevent dolphins and fishers to abandon this tactic? But before answering that, let me just tell you briefly why we should care about it. So this cooperative foraging, it matters for the dolphins. Those that consistently forage with fishers, they have a higher probability of surviving. And it's also important for their social lives. So this foraging strategy has been shaping the dolphin society into different groups, different social communities, which nowadays has been dismantled by the declining of the foraging interaction with artisanal fishers. And the interaction also matters for this humble fishing community because dolphins generate food and good income, as well as other ecosystem services such as leisure, cultural pride, and a sense of belonging. So fishers are very connected to the dolphins. And as you can see in that picture, this connection, they go beyond much further than just business. However, if the payoffs of the interactions are declining, then the predators need to find alternatives. And an alternative for a fisher is to keep fishing, but fishing with different methods, with different gear. The problem is few fishing gear are less impactful as the artisanal net casting. So as an alternative, fishers could, for example, increase their game by trawling for shrimp, or start placing drift nets, tremel nets, to catch other fish species like catfish. Now, note that these drift nets, this kind of tremel nets, they're being placed over a larger area, not only in the interaction sites. Here, if you can see those small yellow dots, and the area where they interact, the blue shades there is the home range of the good cooperative dolphins. Now for the dolphins, an alternative is like any other dolphin in the world, just forage by yourself. But that means they have to increase their home range areas. For example, this is the home range areas of the bad dolphins, the non-cooperative ones. And yeah, but then this change of strategies, both for the fishers and for the dolphins, it carries a high cost for both. It's, well, for the fishers, the problem is these drift netting is illegal. And for the dolphins, it's harmful. And in fact, this behavior change in both parties, well, for example, placing this tremel nets increases the probability of bycatching dolphins. And in fact, the bycatching such nets are now a major source of mortality in this population, and it looks like it's going up. So if both predators change strategy, then the question now becomes, when will this competition and overlapping ranges turn that mutually beneficial interaction into a mutually harmful one? And what can we do about that? So a place to start is then take a step back and take everything that we learned from the system and trying to predict what's going to happen, when it's going to happen. So, but now having a good understanding of the fine mechanics of the interaction between dolphins and fishers, as well as those longer term trends in the population of dolphins and fishers, we can stick all of this into numerical models to predict when things will change and how this interaction, how the system can cope with these changes. So I'll now combine data on the fisheries with those long-term studies on population and behavior of dolphins and fishers to build scenarios of environmental and behavior changes. So our model considers different scenarios of mullet suitability over there, which will influence the frequency at which dolphins will engage in interaction with artisanal fishers. And that frequency affects the demography of dolphins, so survival rates, recruitment rates, and how often they change from one strategy to the other. And dolphin demography then feeds back into how willing the artisanal fishers are to keep fishing with dolphins and closing them in cycle. Okay, so let's start with the worst case scenario just to get it out of the way. So the worst case scenario, we now consider a crash in the mullet stock. So the availability of mullet will decline quickly over time. And the fishers are not so keen in keep fishing with dolphins, so their willingness is pretty low as well. As soon as the fish start becoming less abundant, they change strategies and to start drift netting, and therefore doubling the probability of bycatch of dolphins. Now, the current scenario, there's a decline, but it's more slowly, so it's a linear decline. Same for the fishers, some change, but not all of them, and the bycatch is still there. Now, best case scenario, fish for everyone, stable over time. Fishers are super willing to keep fishing, so yeah, let's do this. This is our tradition. Therefore, the bycatch goes to the baseline. And then to measure this sort of resilience of the system, we then translate into the population trajectory of dolphins. How long will it take for these dolphins to stay there or die off? So in the best case scenario, everything is stable, good. Population tends to reach carrying capacity, happy, everybody's happy. Good, in the current scenario, not so much. So declining resource means that there's more drift netting, and it's bad news, especially for the bad dolphins, the non-cooperative ones in yellow. Forgot to say the colors make the three strategies of dolphins: the good, the bad, and the lazy. Right, so the cooperative dolphins, the blue and green there, they're somehow buffered by this, but the non-cooperative not so much. But not forever. If the resource declines too quickly, then bad news for everyone. Fishers will abandon that interaction, start drift netting, increasing the bycatch, and the population of dolphins, therefore the interaction, the cooperative system is predicted to be extinct in 40 years from now. 40 years, not that much. I'm almost 40 and feels like yesterday when I didn't have a mustache. So the bottom line here is changing in behavior can introduce many negative interactions in our ecological system there. So we can turn the traditional fishers into environmental outlaws. It can increase the mortality of dolphins, and it can overexploit the local ecosystem. But overall, it means that the system can flip. So we would flip this. Once a stable system would flip from a positive interaction to a negative one. Now, the last question is, what can we do to reverse this arrow and get back to the happy blue stage? So we can start locally. And to illustrate now the value of these local actions, I will simulate two other scenarios. And so in both scenarios, large regional change, environmental changes represented by the crash in the mullet stock will meet local behavior changes represented by changes in the net casting fisheries. So while desirable, reversing a crash in the mullet stock would take immense political and economical change. However, changing the behavior of the fishers is a bit more manageable. So let's start with that. So even if the mullet fish crashes, so we can try, and therefore the fishers are not so keen and keep fishing, we can start doing something to the drift nets to control bycatch. So for example, increasing efforts into removing those bycatch, those drift nets would, in theory, control the bycatch, and yeah, it looks a bit better. So the populations decline, but this decline more slowly. But this top-down action is not enough. And it's not enough because it oversimplifies the whole problem. Yeah, enforcing the law helps, it's good, but it overlooks the fact that the fishers engage in other activities than illegal drift netting. And also, he overlooks the fact that dolphins die from other causes. There's not only bycatch, there's contamination, there's natural causes. So a more thorough conservation program would also call for a bottom-up approach. So now, what about instead of just punishing these fishers for their understandable change of strategy? Remember that these are mostly low-income people trying to make a living. What about then we celebrate their traditional fisheries, we add value to this culture? So here, facing with the mullet crash, what we could do is try and keep those fishers fishing with dolphins, regardless of the declining payoffs. We could do that by putting a premium price on the fish that they catch with dolphins, or providing other governmental incentives to keep them fishing there. So this would reduce the illegal fisheries, therefore controlling a bit the bycatch. But again, this action alone is not enough. But here's some good news. What you're seeing there is on the y-axis a proportion of 1,000 replicates of our model simulations. On the x-axis you have the time, and those curves show the proportion of the number of times the population of dolphins went extinct. The colors show if they're bad, good, or lazy cooperative dolphins. So the top-down approach only and the bottom-up approach only, they don't look very well. There's a whole lot of extinctions there. But now when we combine both into this integrative conservation program, we can mirror the best case scenario showing over there on the top. So even with the crash in the mullet stock, so the availability of resource declined, and there's not much we can do about that. Even with that, by controlling the behavior of fisher, or controlling is not the best word, but by influencing the behavior of the fishers, for the dolphin population, we can mirror the best case scenario. And by keeping the dolphins there, we therefore keep the interaction at the cultural fishery. And we've been seeing this combined approach gaining momentum locally. So there has been recent advances in the local legislation and the local legal protection, not only of the dolphins, but also of the interaction itself as a cultural heritage. So to me, it's very inspiring to see that the locals understand the value of zooming in and conserving few components of the system for the greater good. And conserving these three species part of the ecosystem is important. We certainly don't want the Laguna dolphins to be caught in the same trap of negative fishing interactions. They're taking away other dolphins around the world, for example, the vaquita. So the Laguna dolphins are only 60. This is a small and resident population of a newly recognized subspecies that is now endemic to that tiny portion of the South American coast. So disturbing this interaction would threaten not only this small pocket of genetic diversity, but a small pocket of cultural diversity too. The fact that this human-animal interaction has been around for over a century really means two things. First is a behavior specialization that has outlived individual dolphins, individual fishes, has been passing down through generations, not genetically, but by learning. So it's part of the culture of fishes and also culture of dolphins, if you will. And second, being around for that long does not guarantee that we'll stay forever. It could go extinct like the other few cooperative human-wildlife interactions that were once widespread, and they're gone now. So in zooming in, we're seeing how much a behavior specialization matters locally. And now in closing, I want to zoom out again and put that little community back into the tangle web that we cropped at the beginning of the talk, to suggest that if we lose this interaction, we not only lose a specific way of living in a remote place from here, but we lose that cultural behavior that holds that social and ecological system together. And there has been more and more understanding that conserving such cultural behaviors do matter. So cultures not only exist in humans, there's more understanding that they exist in animals too. And conserving in cultures are also a key trait to be preserved for preserving biodiversity. And just like biological diversity, cultural diversity is everywhere, but they're specific to each place. And this one, it's also interspecific, so somehow connects us humans to them animals. And I don't know if you've seen the news in the past 18 months, but things are not amazing out there. So in face of so many bad news, I still believe that these dolphins can remind us of a simple but important lesson, that by cooperating, we can all coexist in harmony. And with that, I would like to thank my team of cooperators and collaborators back in Brazil, without whom none of this would be possible. And also to emphasize that I now live over there in a room 356. So yeah, come stop by, let's have a chat, let's cooperate. There's some work to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to do a little mic check. Sana, can you see if people online can hear my mic? Test, test, test. And for folks that are in the room and can hear, if you have any questions, just raise your hand and I'll bring hopefully a working mic to you in a moment. Okay, they can hear us. All right. I got a question in the room.
Thanks, Mauricio. That was amazing work and really cool the way you bring it all together. My question is about habitat. So I assume, you talked about habitat a little bit at the beginning, but I assume that at the same time that this long study period has been going on, some of the habitat has also changed just through development or changes in the coastline or something in that area. Because it seems like I would imagine that foraging strategy for both the fishers and the dolphins is pretty habitat specific. I mean, there was also those discrete yellow dots where you said this takes place. It seems like maybe sandy, slopey bottom, shallow enough for the fishers to stand and, dolphins to get in there. So I just wonder if that's also shifting in that area and contributing to any of the dynamics that you're trying to describe.
Right, great. Thanks for the great question. Absolutely, the habitat does play a role for the interaction to happen. As you notice, you need those super steep slope where the dolphins can push the fish against, and therefore that's where it happens on those specific spots. The area has been changing recently. There's a big I can't remember the year now. I think it's less than 10 years ago. They built a bridge in between those two parts of the lagoon, and that in itself already shuffled the range of the dolphins around. So there used to be a few more spots towards the area that no longer exist, and well, let alone all the noise and pollution that comes from the sorts of development. But yeah, you're right. These types of changes in the coast has the potential to affect the interaction, and for both sides, for good and for bad. I just want to say that because that canal where I showed you where the fish migrates, that canal is also man-made. So I think it was in the 60s, they formally built that. So by building that, by changing the environment, that they create that super slope which is now one of the main spots for interaction. So things are dynamic too, and can go both ways. So far, I would say that changing the environment in terms of these features, these physical features, doesn't look like to be the main problem, other than the interactions with negative interactions with other fisheries, and as well chemical pollution. So around the area, there's rice farms, and yeah, all that stuff runs into the water. And more we've been seeing this on like skin diseases on the dolphins. And so this is one part of the problem. And I assume this is not it's widespread in other systems too, these types of anthropogenic impacts. And yeah, thanks.
Okay, any questions online? All right, question in the room. I had one way up here first. Hang on one
Let's
second.
see. I know there's a box that I cannot leave. I have to think outside the box.
Hi, Mauricio. Thanks so much.
you.
Amazing. I'm really intrigued by one of the early slides, and you came back to it at the end of the talk, where you showed a global map and referred to the widespread number of other examples of human cetacean interactions that were beneficial, and you referred to the fact that most of those are no longer existent. Yes.
Yes.
Could you just speak to that a little bit more in detail and tell us not only just some examples of those, but why are they mostly no longer existent?
Right.
And maybe even what does your research tell us about that?
Right. That's a great question. Thank you very much. Well, this map here is part of an ongoing project with other folks that work with interactions between birds and humans, so honey guides and honey hunters in several parts of the African continent, and in some other dolphin research around the world that have been studied, for example, in Myanmar and in Mauritania over there. And so I just realized that this map is a bit, is not the final form, but in blue, we have what we call the active at the moment, and in red, the inactive, potentially extinct. So interactions with between humans and wildlife are clearly gone with the orca whales in the famous case in Australia. And there's some historical cases here in the Bering Strait. And what else? Some other, so to begin with, all of these cases, they vary a lot in the evidence that we have that this is indeed a cooperative foraging interaction between humans and wildlife. In the cases where we are pretty close to say, okay, this is a cooperation, are in southern Brazil with all this evidence we showed, and from other studies too, in Myanmar and in Mauritania. So in the others, for example, in the Amazon, there's one report of one case. So the evidence, the quality amount of evidence vary a lot. Just compile everything that has been ever published about this. So we don't know why these interactions went extinct in all of those places, but we believe that it has to do with either the resource going or the loss of the knowledge in at least one of the sides of the interaction. So that's why at the end, I try to emphasize the need for conserving the knowledge, the idea, the behavior as well, not only the biological diversity, but the cultural diversity, if you will. Because we can get the entire dolphin population replaced or fisher population replaced, and those skills, they're gone. They're not archived. They're not holding, in any other way. So my feeling is losing the skills or the knowledge about the interaction is really playing a big impact in this. So with that in mind, when we look what's still there in terms of human-wildlife interactions, so we need to conserve, I guess, not only the biological part of it, keeping the fish, the resource, the animal partner and the human partner alive and doing well, but also knowing what to do, when to do, and how to interact. And then over time, those are, and then we can start a whole new discussion of this, but I'm not saying that we have to conserve this way of living. I myself, I'm not a fisher, so it's easy for me to say, yeah, you guys should keep doing this thing and then go home and do something else. So it's not, I don't want to impose this, but if it sounds like it's still beneficial for both sides, why not preserving that? So with our colleagues who are studying in Africa, they're really doing a fantastic job in trying to archive this all the steps of this interaction. So where to go hunt with the birds in that case, what kind of signals and communication signals they do to each other. So find a way to archive that as well, but leaving super open for the people who depend on this to decide if it's a good thing to keep doing or not. Yeah. I don't know. I feel that at this point I'm just ranting, but I kind of lose the end of the answer.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, we'll talk a little bit more about it. It
Mhm.
reminds me of a paper I read some time ago about industrial whaling wiping out populations, and we know now relatively naive perception that species inhabit the oceans in a homogeneous way. So if you have a void geographically, individuals will just fill it in. And we know now that that's not the way populations behave. And we believe it's increasingly because of a loss of cultural knowledge of that habitat as being good. Blue whales in South Georgia are a classic example. They are finally starting to come back. But anyway, really fascinating stuff. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
All right, I'm just going to check. Sana, any questions online? Yes, 1 second.
Okay, this is a question from Ryan. Have you seen in your research that ecological network structures may actually minimize the effects of climate change? The networks increase biodiversity and allow for adaptations to climate change.
Wow, that's a fantastic question. Give me a second to digest. So social networks, dolphins and fishers, both sides, I assume. Climate change. We'll get there in a sec. So what can I say about that? I think, let me read this question again. Who asked that question? I want to make sure I got it right before I start throwing some keywords there. I don't see. Sorry, I don't see it, but okay. So what can I say about this? I guess the only link I can make now between social networks and climate change will be again related to what we're discussing with Lisa in terms of how this information can spread in both populations. So the network topology, either the dolphins or the fishers, will define who gets access to what kind of information, what kind of behavior. And it's important that those skills between the skills on how to forage together in synchrony are being properly passed on both sides in order to this to happen. Now, if the climate changes, I don't see a direct influence on the information, on the behavior itself, but perhaps on the availability of resource. So it will be an indirect link right there. What else?
I think we can let you off the hook if you want,
Okay.
and say if you have follow-up questions, please reach out directly
really
to
wanna-
Mauricio.
Yeah, who asked that? Ryan, let's write a paper about this. We need, but I just need more time.
Sounds like a collaboration in the
Yeah,
works.
10 seconds to answer.
All right, for everybody online, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you being here. And for everyone in the room, thank you so much for coming. I hope to see you in 2 weeks and you get next week off. If you have follow-up questions, one of the great things about being in the room is you can come on up and just talk to Mauricio if you have questions. So everybody else, thank you so much. And for those online, we're going to end the presentation here in just a moment. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. All right, let's talk. Where is it? Thanks. Oh, right.
All right, for those online, we're going to end the presentation. Thank you.